Okay, we're back, and it's time to move on to our next session. 続いてのセッションですが、こちらはイサリアムの新天地 EVM 互換チェーンの進化を探るという、タイトルとなっております。So our next session is entitled Beyond Ethereum, Exploring the Evolution of EVM-compatible Chains. それでは、登壇者の皆様をご紹介いたしましょう。So our speakers for today are Head of Strategy at Eclipse, Terry Chung. Co-founder and CEO of Monad Labs, Keone Hon, founder of OriginTrail, Tomaz Levak, and ecosystem at Berachain, Francis Kang. それでは皆様拍手でお迎えください. Let's welcome our guest to the stage. どうぞ. Oh, right on time. Nice. Okay.So, Francis, I believe you are the moderator for this session. You don't look anything like your picture. Okay.
Yeah, sadly, I do not. I wish I was. Yeah,
I disagree on that, actually.
You either, actually. Okay. If you're ready to go, I'll just hand it over to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And obviously, I think we're all lucky to be here in Tokyo in a work capacity, which is a great city. And I think we can start with intros to the Japanese audience.I'll go first. Francis from Berachain doing ecosystem growth in Asia. And then I'll hand it off to you, Keone.
Hi, I'm Keone Hon, co-founder and CEO of Monad Labs, building performant EVM L1.
Hi, my name's Tomaz. I'm founder at OriginTrail. Yeah, we've been using EVM since roughly 2016 to run a decentralized knowledge graph on top of it.
Hi, my name is Terry. I'm head of strategy at Eclipse. We're building Solana on Ethereum, which is the first SVM L2 that settles to Ethereum. Nice to meet y'all.
Awesome. I think we can get started with somewhat higher level. So, given that our topic today is about scaling, what's your long-term vision for scaling within EVM? And then within those verticals, which verticals of, for example, DeFi, GameFi, all these verticals we have in our industry, what are you prioritizing the most with that scaling in mind?
Sure. I think the EVM is actually a really fun, really exciting environment to be working in. It's a very well-defined standard. It's quite powerful. People, knock it sometimes, but it's actually a totally reasonable standard. But there's a lot of opportunities to make it a lot more performant by introducing different optimizations that actually stack on top of each other, such as introducing a performant database for storing Ethereum Merkle tree state, parallel execution so that many transactions can be run in parallel, thus utilizing time a lot better, and lastly, introducing asynchronous execution where execution's moved out of the hot path of consensus, which is another huge speed up that we work on within Monad.
Awesome. Terry, do you have any thoughts on the Eclipse side?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of those things, but I think the beauty of building a L2 is that you are not bound by any execution model or any specific VM specification because you're an L2. I think not a lot of people have played around with it. And if you have access to an execution environment or /VM that is significantly more performant out of the box and designed for performance, and has sort of in production capabilities that have been proven to be highly performant. Solana does about 1,500 real TPS, not counting vote transactions. I think putting that on Ethereum and exposing and allowing the Ethereum ecosystem to have access to that execution is very valuable.
Yeah, I think standards were mentioned, and it popped up just the thought of one of our founders, Dr. Bob Metcalf, the Turing Award winner. He was explaining how Ethernet became the standard, something that's still today all across this building and firing up internet globally. But it wasn't a given. That actually started as one of the standards. And with adoption, it became the standard. And if I draw a parallel with EVM here, again, looking back maybe from the early days, the difference of requirements in scalability and throughputs are changing with adoption. So even if you look at OriginTrail with the decentralized knowledge graph, you maybe started off with cases where you would, you didn't require that big of a throughput also from this trust layer of EVM, but over the course of the years, you got bigger ecosystems. We're talking like a lot of, let's say in supply chain, big companies using it and especially over the course of the last 2 years, AI becoming more relevant. And we're talking about AI, it's like we need internet scale. And we're talking internet scale. It's like wherever we find internet today, that's where we should find support in trust layers as well, because otherwise it's going to be difficult to support any of the verticals, whether DeFi or anything else. So yeah, I think that should be our goal. And of course, the good work that people on this panel are doing are helping us to get there.
While we're within this topic, I know where there's a lot of opportunity in the EVM space for scaling, but I think it's unique, like with Terry and Keone here. I think you guys are also addressing a lot of problem that Solana went through last cycle. I'm wondering for the audience, what kind of a specific problem that SVM faced that you guys are addressing? I'm sure we're aware, like Solana, like especially last cycle, just not halting and the chain halt and things like that. I think if you guys could lean more onto that, it would be super insightful.
Yeah, I can start. Chain halting and like critical consensus failures, those have been largely addressed by the Solana team. I think a lot of people are remembering, like who here has transacted on Solana during like April or like May, that period of time? Well, like you would have expected a lot of congestion. That was largely because of economic kind of incentives to spam transactions for inclusion without necessarily going through the path of, say, in an EVM, just raising your priority fee so that you get included earlier. I think those are becoming addressed with time, with a better scheduling algorithm at Solana, and as well as like a bandwidth throttling method. That makes your bandwidth proportional to stake. Now, we're not huge fans of this method, but I also think there's internal works in Solana, Agave, Anza, those teams where people are building better algorithms for QoS as well.
Right. So I think one obvious difference between Ethereum and Solana is that in Ethereum, the transactions generally don't pre-specify their dependencies. There's an optional field called an access list in Ethereum, which allows the sender to specify all of the account slot tuples that are going to be touched. But generally speaking, it's not really used. It's not supported by MetaMask. So for all intents and purposes, in Ethereum, when you submit a transaction, you literally just say, I'm calling this contract, I'm calling this function, I'm passing in these parameters, figure it out. Whereas in Solana, there's what's referred to as this account model where any transaction has to pre-specify the exact accounts that are going to be read in and written to. And if there's any deviation from that in the actual execution, the execution fails. So that's sort of like a big fork in the road in terms of how transactions work. I personally think that it makes more sense to take the Ethereum route of being more flexible, because the reality is that at the time when you submit a transaction, well, first of all, how would you determine the actual dependencies for that transaction? What you would do is you'd simulate the transaction before you sent it and see what account slot tuples it's going to touch, and then you would specify those. But that's at the time that you simulate. So there are two issues with that. Number one is that having to include that extra information takes up more bandwidth. And in the end state, and Terry, I think you were actually kind of alluding to this, in the end state, I think that scaling, actually the limitation is going to be the bandwidth, not the execution or state access or things like that. So that's the first one. And then the second issue is that you simulate, but then when the transaction actually executes, it could be that the world has changed a little bit since then. Like you were swapping against you were sending through a smart order router and it hit a Uniswap pool, but then later when it actually executes, the best price is a different thing. So you end up going in a different direction. So it's a bad user experience for that transaction to fail and for you to have to resubmit. In Ethereum, that's all figured out under the hood. And similarly for Monad, even though Monad is doing parallel execution, it's still figured out under the hood and just dealt with.
Yeah, so I definitely think, should we take a question before I respond?
When you were talking about Solana requiring everything to be checked before a transaction happens, is that because of the nature of Rust being immutable and very strictly typed?
No, I can answer that. So basically in Solana, you have to say, I'm touching this account, this account, this account, this account. And then what the scheduler does is it says, okay, look at this transaction, this transaction. This transaction touches these accounts. This transaction touches these accounts. Therefore, we know ahead of the fact that we can schedule these together in parallel, right? Whereas in EVM parallel execution, what you do is you just you have a list of transactions that are ordered, and then you kind of like take a batch and you go, okay, I'm going to assume all these can be executed in parallel. Bam, let's go. And then in the process, if there are any conflicts between, say, like what this transaction reads and what the previous transaction wrote, then you go, okay, we got to re-execute that. And then you go execute batch, okay, re-execute, validate, re-execute, validate, re-execute, validate until there are no more conflicts left. Versus in Solana, what you can do is, okay, all of these are non-conflicting and we know ahead of time, so we're just going to slot them ahead, like we're just going to slot them to be executed in parallel, and they're all going to work out because we know ahead of time that that there are no conflicts in the transaction. So this is what I wanted to get to, which is like, yes, there are trade-offs. Knowing the account access patterns beforehand is hard. It's tough. It's hard on DevX as well. If you've ever read a Solana contract, it's like account 1, account 2, account 3. It's like, oh, well, that looks very complicated. And that's definitely, I think, why EVM still to date has a dominance in terms of dev mindshare. But what you get as like a trade-off with that is performance, right? So we did a benchmark with, looking at block STM with MoveBM and C level, and we were looking at kind of like, okay, given the same level of state contention, like what is the throughput capable, at certain block size, certain number of cores, and we did find out that there is a bit of additional overhead in the re-execution process, like a single transaction re-execution process, very low overhead, but it adds up over time as you have more and more blocks and more contention, such that in high contention environments, which is normally what a blockchain experiences, the XVM is able to become more performant. But yes, there are trade-offs in that you have to do these account access patterns ahead of time, and that does affect DevX.
And that actually kind of brings me to another interesting topic, which is that in Solana, because there's pre-specification of dependencies, you can have warring arbitrage bots that basically say that they have dependencies that they actually don't, to try to box out their competitors' transactions. So like if Terry and I are both running MEV bots, and like I want to kind of game the scheduler, then when I submit my transaction, I'll say that I need some of Terry's accounts as part of my transaction, even though I don't actually need them. And then the scheduler, it's pretty complicated. It's kind of we don't need to get into it, but it's complicated, and sometimes it can actually have the result that it will choose my transaction, and not schedule Terry's until later. So I think in an adversarial environment where the dependencies are actually affecting the scheduling, you can really get some pretty bad behavior that leads to actually very inefficient scheduling.
Yeah, so it is true that an adversary can lock your account and affect the scheduling. And I think this is something that actually Solana needs to solve with differential fees. And I think there were a lot of people that are exploring this path, which was like, okay, like even before there was no fees for write locking accounts, right, in previously, but now there's about 300 CUs per write locks. So you can't just you can still willy-nilly write lock accounts if it makes economic sense for you. But in a sense, that's kind of similar to saying, you can bid up your priority fees willy-nilly in order to access some state of contentious state. And so, yeah, like people are exploring things like dynamic write lock fees, kind of like EIP 1559, where your base write lock fee goes up for a piece of contentious state. And people are generally exploring ways where you could disincentivize people from write locking state that you don't need.
Now that we talked a lot about just more on the technical scaling side, I think another part of the equation is scaling the ecosystem, community, and a lot of those things. Given that all of you got most Eclipse, Monad, like new in the market and new entrants in the ecosystem. Also you, Tomaz, you've been here for a while looking at multiple ecosystems you've seen before. What do you guys think are the like organic way to scale the ecosystem and community without just purely incentivizing like grand farmers and mercenary builders and developers and whatnot? And I'm curious to know how each team is taking that approach.
Yeah, what we've ended up finding within Monad is that, well, first of all, the Monad community is incredible. It's extremely strong. There's incredible individuals who are contributing so much to make it a really fun environment, welcoming to newbies, and creating a lot of really fun initiatives like the Monad Run Club, which is it's actually just a Strava group, but it's an effort to initially run 10,000 kilometers, and they hit that pretty quickly. So now they're shooting for about 100,000 kilometers. There's like all these different community initiatives, but I think at the end of the day, the most important principle is just community should be fun, and community builders should think about how to build a community that offers the most value to the users. Like, not talking about the incentives at all. Like, literally just like, this is a fun environment where I've made a ton of friends. I've like gained a lot of Twitter followers. I have an audience for my art. I have opportunities to take on leadership opportunities. There's just so much going on. It's so vibrant, but it's all a very virtuous cycle driven by people who are contributing so much to make it a really fun environment.
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of it that was said here. It's, I guess, about empowering the community members, and we've seen some cool stuff happening in the OriginTrail ecosystem, from rap songs being released, I think a few of those already, to fun community events taking place. But at the same time, it's also a multi-stakeholder environment where obviously a single person doesn't take up all the different kind of roles within the community. Some of them are there to pursue one or the other. Of course, there's also those that are trying to build on top of the infrastructure that you're creating. And in the case of OriginTrail, there's also a very vibrant community of enterprise users, or real-world users, let's say like that, so we don't lock it in to just enterprise, where for them, some of the intricacies of just using the one particular layer are less so important than maybe how do I fit this into my strategy plan, or how this is going to impact my business model in the future. So yeah, sometimes it's you see how the community develops, but it's not something that you take for granted, or it's not something that you would just kind of be approaching entirely in a way hands off, or not thinking about it. I think it's ecosystem development is an important part of the blockchain initiatives as a whole, because that's why EVM is what it is, because it has community, because it has users, because it has adoption. Like, there's X many accounts on EVM already, which have people behind them, or have organizations behind them, or have history behind them. That's important. And yeah, I think those are the elements. And of course, from the builder side, make it easy and fun to use.
Yeah, community cannot be an afterthought.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's an integral part of what we're building.
Yeah, I echo the statements made by you guys. I think for us, we've been trying to build something that we think is cool. Like, if you've ever tried to use Eclipse, you pay gas and ETH, and you get instant confirmations, and you're using like Orca or something, and on Backpack Wallet, it's kind of it's a really weird experience, and I think it's kind of cool. And in the process, I think we've had a lot of people who also kind of feel the same way, right? Like, for example, we launched public DevNet, or like mainnet for developers, expressly saying, this is a period of time for people on Solana who are not used to, managing multi-chain deployments, to kind of try and bridge their application over and, experiment around with multi-chain deployments. And we're like, okay, we're not going to have a bridge front end. And we launched that. And like 3 days later, we had 3 different bridge front ends. And then people were bridging, and people were minting NFTs. And we had, I think, the first NFT collection mint out on Eclipse. There was no front end. People were just interacting with the contract. And it's really cool to see. And when things like this happen, we try to like amplify them. We try to make sure there's an audience for it. And that's kind of been our strategy.
Awesome. And with the growing number of EVM-compatible chains and Layer 2 solutions, how do you guys are tackling to gain developer mindshare and improve their experience, given that the developers can have many options to choose from these days? So curious to know like how each team is tackling the problem. Keone, you spoke to community earlier. Like on Monad, I'm curious to know like how are you guys are tackling like existing developer experience, and also given that they have so many solutions, how do you guys plan to stand out?
Yeah, I think it's just about being best in class in all different categories, whether that's developer experience, so making sure that the best stack is available in terms of account abstraction, RPC, indexing, like all of these sort of best practice things, as well as pushing forward the best practices. I think the Solana team has done a really good job of being thoughtful about introducing new product lines, almost like ZK compression or
Blinks.
Solana Blinks, yeah, absolutely. Like there's just, so I think that it's about pushing the frontier of that dev stack. That's one thing. And then the other part is just cultivating a really rich environment where folks know that at the beginning of mainnet going forward, there's just going to be a ton of users, a ton of activity. And so it's really going to be an environment where one can thrive as a developer.
Yeah, I think for OriginTrail, and I think it's an extension of what really was said, is like our focus is really to allow builders to create good decentralized AI, which in this sense means that it's not just the blockchain, it's a decentralized knowledge graph and potentially some things on top that allows them to have a seamless way of going from an idea to creating something that can work for them in predictable steps. And then I guess another thing that we always looked for in building out was it's around 3 value points. So it's neutrality, it's inclusiveness, and it's usability. So if usability is like, okay, make it quick and actionable for someone to do it, inclusiveness should be trying to not create lockout situations for certain technologies. So either that's a database you use or that's a blockchain you use. So the decentralized knowledge graph is actually a multi-chain network. It can integrate with kind of multiple EVM-compatible chains at the same time, so that when a developer comes or a builder comes, they can choose, okay, I'm doing something on Monad, I'll do it there, or I'm doing something on ETH, I'll do it there. And then, yeah, neutrality, it's all about kind of, yeah, not picking your winner. So we also have a EVM-compatible chain in OriginTrail ecosystem called NeuroWeb, but in no way it's kind of like being, you know, it has some particular features which are particular for the decentralized knowledge graph and make it more interesting for the builder to use, but it's, again, neutrality allows you to a freedom of choice of how you want to structure something. So I think that's an important part.
Yeah, I think it's less of a consideration for us for the time being. There's not a lot of SVM chains. Realistically, I think there's only 2 that you can actually transact on, which is us and Solana. But there's also like a Pith or a Zen. Not entirely sure what's on those ecosystems that you can like users can interact with. So it's not a huge problem for us, but SVM chains are coming in mass. So it is definitely something to consider. I think it's, as Keone said, most important to be best in class at everything, be cheapest, be fastest, and have the biggest distribution.
Awesome. Bringing back to where we are, more so in Tokyo and broader APAC, I think one of the trends I've seen is a lot of the applications that's more so leading the trend are coming from the West and Western developers. How are you guys like working and planning on helping local developers who have a language barrier, who lack access to information and capital? Like I think it's one of the things that we've seen as well coming to Asia. So like curious to know how you guys are approaching that, and then looking at like developer growth in APAC in general.
I'll mention 2 things rather than trying to cover the entire spectrum. So I think the first actually is access to capital. It's definitely more challenging at the moment to raise funds as an Asia-based developer. So you know, I and my team, we're trying to help address that just by building, helping to identify the really strong builders, and then you know, help them get access to Western capital. That's one thing. And then I think the second thing is just developer education. So building out a suite of tools that can ultimately help developers regardless of their journey, whether they're like in university or just getting started building, all the way up to someone who's, you know, ready to or is already building an application.
Yeah, I think it's our first visit to OriginTrail's first visit to Japan. So I have to say it's a learning experience. We found it to be very welcoming, and I think the task at hand really that can spark good motions, or how we always see it, is to create good opportunities either for builders or also for companies and users to get excited about the technology and see the opportunity of what they can create with it from the value perspective, and then on the back of that create a story. So it's all about building those relationships that can enable that type of establishment, let's say, in the region, and we feel that that's the biggest contribution that we can also make in seeing that the Web3 makes a big impact in the region.
We have a ton of in-person presence. I live here in Japan and Korea. I try to come to Japan like 2 months a year. I live in Korea. We have teammates in India, teammates in Singapore. And so we have quite an extensive regional language coverage. A lot of people in our team speak Chinese, Japanese, Korean. And the other thing is access to capital, as Keone mentioned. We have an extensive network of even Asia-based VCs that are interested in investing in Asia-based projects. So that hasn't been like a huge issue for us, just introducing Asia-based projects to capital sources that are in proximity to them, that understand them, that also speak the language as well.
Awesome. And then I think to end the session, I think we've been going through a lot of rough waters in the past 2 years, and then sort of heading to greener pastures later in this year, and then also throughout 2025. What kind of catalysts and things you guys are looking forward in the next year? And also, like from a year from now, what kind of goal would you have want to achieve for each respective ecosystem of yours?
I just want to see great apps get built. I think that's really the key to onboarding more folks into the Web3 space and getting more people to understand the value of decentralized apps.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think there's a big opportunity that's happening in the decentralized AI space that the DKG is perfectly positioned for, and it's really just scratching the surface on what type of impact this can create. So I'm definitely looking forward of how the Web3 can support AI revolution and vice versa, of course.
Yeah, I'm excited for dApps. I just kind of think back sometimes to all the fun that I had in the past 2 years. Yeah, yes, it's been a bit of a price down movement, but like there have been so many great dApps that I've loved. FinTech first launched, that was amazing. That was super fun. Fantasy Tops, I still play it every day. Super fun. A lot of my friends and I, we sometimes market make or trade on Polymarket with different, Reddit Alpha, whatever. It's super fun. Pump.fun and all that kind of stuff. It's fun. And my desire is just so that there's more dApps like this on Eclipse where people can enjoy and people can have fun transacting and just like using these dApps.
Awesome. More dApps, less infra. Awesome. Well, we're running late. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. And then shout out to organizers putting up this conference. I used to run one and it's a nightmare. So yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thank you very much. Before you leave the stage, we'd like to get a quick picture with the four of you. So if you could stand up and make your way to the center of the stage right there where that white dot is right there. ここでちょっと写真を撮らせていただいてからご講談いただきます。Thank you very much. 皆様改めて拍手お願いします。Another round of applause. Thank you. ではですね、ここでちょっと休憩を挟ませていただいてから次のセッションに参りたいと思います。約10分間ぐらいでしょうかね。再開が13時55分となりますので、約10分ぐらいの休憩となりますので、その時間の前にですね、またご着席いただいてですね、次のセッションをご覧いただけたらと思います。So we're going to take a quick break, about 10 minutes. We'll start up again at 1:55 p.m. So yeah, it's about 10 minutes. 1:55 p.m. is when the next session starts. So, grab something to eat, some coffee, run to the restroom, whatever. And then please come and join us back again for our next session. See you back in a few moments. Thank you.